Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the inaugural episode of TimestealerTV. This is a very special episode because, by popular demand, we are going to be covering the foundations of Truckanomics. Now, this is a subject that has been hotly requested by as many as one person, and it just seemed like a good way to start off TimestealerTV. This isn't a scripted video. We're just going to sit down together and we're going to have a nice cozy chat about a broad overview of the different types of wagons you might find on Britain's railways in the steam era, but some of these would have been used after that as well. So I hope you are sat comfortably. I hope you've got your wheat lemon drink or your Nescafe Gold or your AeroPress coffee or whatever is your beverage of choice. Nice mug of tea. And strap yourselves in and get ready for some autism, because that's what you're getting. So here on the screen, you can see the first wagon we're taking a look at. And before we continue, I should say that I've got a lot of image references ready, and they are laid out in the same order that roughly different types of wagons were laid out or listed in the diagram book for British railways, i.e. the nationalised railways after 1948. A diagram is sort of like a model number for an appliance, you might say. But that's not necessarily hugely important. But first of all, we're looking at open wagons, open general merchandise type wagons, and this is a low, what's known as a low wagon. This is one built by the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. I've tried to include a good mix of wagons from different time periods, just so we get a bit of variety. So this is a 19th century one, and as you can tell by the spoked wheels and the grease axle boxes and the somewhat rudimentary brake gear, it's got a couple of planks. The sides don't drop down. This would be used for carrying things like agricultural equipment, or perhaps a large box or something of that sort. So moving on, now we're looking at, I believe this is an LMS development of that sort of thing. It's coded low fit. Low because it is low-sided, and fit because it is fitted with vacuum brakes. Not the 8-shoe vacuum brake, just the 4-shoe, with some vacuum cylinder in there somewhere. And it's been modernised a bit with oleo buffers, but it's not necessarily a hugely fancy bit of kit. And you get to see a bloke riding on the brake van there. Let's continue. And then this is the ultimate evolution of this sort of type of wagon. This was one built by Nationalised Railways. You can tell that it was built by Nationalised Railways when it's in the British Railways livery, because it has a B prefix before the number. Once again, low fit, and it's got 8-shoe vacuum brakes, as you can tell here. That means it's got 2 shoes on each wheel, and it's all steel construction, no wooden planking for the body. The sides are drop sides, which is always useful, as you can imagine, and it does in fact say not to be loaded with containers. However, they regularly were, even though they weren't supposed to be, because who cares about the rules? As we can see here, this one is a preserved example, but it's happened a lot. Containers, you're not really supposed to. Why that is, I don't know. Perhaps because they didn't have the correct roping points, but who knows. And so now moving on to medium goods wagons. This one here is actually only 2 planks. They're usually between 2 and 3 planks. This one doesn't have drop sides. I believe this is an old London North Western Railway one. Very old, as you can tell by the extremely crude rudimentary braking system and the grease axle boxes. Well, let's move on to the next one. So moving on a bit now, we're looking at an LMS model, the successor company to the London North Western Railway. You can already see a bit of a serious improvement in the brakes there. It's got Morton brakes, and it's free plank sides. It's got a little bit of a jobby here to help cushion the sides as they drop down. This is now a drop side wagon rather than the previous fixed sides of the other wagon. The sides on this one can now drop down, and it's got steel reinforcements on the end. Just better construction, more practical design. This one's been retroactively given vacuum brakes, as you can see via vacuum pipe. It's in British Railways livery, but it's an LMS design. And then this is the British Railways, the nationalised railways version. As with a lot of the British Railways evolution of the older Big Four wagons, this one has a steel body. It's all around steel construction, and this one also has 8-shoe vacuum brakes. And these particular type of wagons, technically this one would be considered in this category as well, as it does have vacuum brakes. They were known as Medfits, fit for fitted once again, medium because they were medium height essentially. And here we can see another LMS one being loaded with some containers, as this one is. It was more common for them really to carry containers than the low fit or the low sided ones, which as we know are not to be loaded with containers. And now we're moving on to high sided general merchandise wagons, the most common type of wagon on the railway, I would suggest, and apart with the possible exception of mineral wagons. And this was probably the first type of wagon constructed outside of mineral wagons once again, and you carry basically any nondescript item in this, whether it be boxes, planks of wood, bales of cotton were common in my part of the world here in Lancashire for the mills. They would often use to carry bales of cotton. You could carry veg, fruit. I mean, there were specialised fruit and veg vehicles, but you basically, if you weren't really sure, you could just shove it in one of these. And it's got a door on the side that runs the entire length of the body that can be dropped down, and you can load it up off the side of a platform. And this was one built by the Great Eastern Railway. I believe that's just single side brakes, but I'm not entirely sure. Basic, but not a bad design really. It's pretty. Notice the frame is also made of wood, not just the body. Wooden sole bar there. And now you've got a bit more of an advanced one built by the LNER. Still got a wooden sole bar, still got a wooden body, but you've got a double-sided brake lever. You've got oil axle boxes. You've got a generally longer bodywork and sturdier construction. It's a development. Same with the LMS. Similar. They now have steel frames. So the underframe is now steel. Morton brake on both sides. You can see the development here of the doors. They had these little ramps, these little sort of bumps on them, and I believe this was to aid in when they were putting barrows up and they were rolling up with the barrow. It stopped the door from buckling, something like that. And you see pretty much the ultimate evolution of the general merchandise wagon. Once again, this was actually one built by the LNER. They started building these before nationalisation, and then BR continued them. All steel bodywork, 8-shoe brakes, vacuum brakes. Excellent. And this is essentially a sub-genre of general merchandise wagon, where they have a shock system, as you can see there. Shock. This was one built by the LMS, and essentially the frame here is longer than the body there, and the body is attached to the frame via a very long spring that lies horizontal here, that's protected by this plate. And when it was being shunted, it allowed the body to essentially rock on the spring instead of essentially jolting if it would be attached to the frames, and prevents damage to the cargo, which happened a lot and cost the railways an awful lot of money. Notice here, if you can, the corrugated steel or corrugated iron ends, which was becoming increasingly common by the 1940s. And now we're looking at a dedicated container wagon built by the GWR Pride Worldwide and all that. And this one does have vacuum brakes. The only thing this would have been used for was carrying containers. So if you remember going all the way back to the beginning with the low-sided goods wagons, not to really with containers, this one explicitly designed for containers. And I believe this is the British Railways version. Better vacuum brakes, pneumatic buffers, loaded very nicely there. And now we are getting on to a particularly, how can I put this, deep subject. That is mineral wagons. I could easily do an entire series on mineral wagons all on their own. A lot of the design of mineral wagon was governed by an organisation called the Railway Clearing House. They were an organisation that all the railway companies and manufacturers of rolling stock were a member of. They joined this organisation voluntarily, and it originally was set up for the distribution of ticket fares when the passenger was covering multiple railway companies. But they also started to get involved with standardisation and weirdly early health and safety practices, but not in an over the top sort of way. And one of the areas they became standardised was in mineral wagons, because this would help with the repair of them if there was a degree of standardisation. And what we can see here is, I believe, in 1907 pattern Railway Clearing House mineral wagon. Don't know which private company it's built for, or built by rather, but it is on hire or to the Great Central Railway. You can see grease axle boxes, wooden frames there. God knows how many of these were manufactured. And you see another one here. Most of these were owned privately. They weren't owned by railway companies like the Great Central here. They were owned by coal merchants or collieries or all manner of companies that had their own wagons to provide fuel for the furnaces if they were manufacturing XYZ. Incredibly common, often in very colourful liveries. And this is the 1923 version. I should point out that all of these wagons, generally speaking, they have a door on the side, on each side, and some of them have doors underneath, and some of them also would have a door on the end. This one doesn't have a door on the end, but it was very common for them to have a door or here on one end to allow them to be tipped. Essentially, they will be tipped open. They'll be attached to a tipper by the wheels, and then they will be tipped, and the end would open, all the coal would come out. But better axle boxes, and slightly tidied up saw bar, but not a massive improvement from the previous design. And once again, you can see here a private owner wagon. This is one that's been preserved. I'm not quite sure which railway, probably the Severn Valley Railway, since it's originally supposed to go to the Severn Valley. Some of the pictures I've amassed here are archive, and some of them are from the present-ish day on preserved railways, because they're often the best quality pictures. And this belonged to Highley Mining Company Limited near Kidderminster. And there's a lovely livery. It's red, nice axle boxes. It definitely would not have been anywhere near this clean in service, but very colourful. It's almost a form of advertising for these private companies. And similarly, this one was owned by a company called Stevenson Clark, very, very large operator of mineral wagons, 7,576. They probably had many more than that. This shows the sort of condition that a lot of the private owner mineral wagons entered once they were pooled during the Second World War and then nationalised after 1948. Their appearance degraded gradually. You can see the end door here. That's the end door. And these little things here, little markings, indicate it has bottom doors as well. Still got the side door. The livery was just allowed to fade because this wasn't the company that owned them anymore. But they weren't going to bother repainting over them either because that takes time and money. The wooden-bodied planked mineral wagons soon began to be replaced by, well, I say soon, eventually they were replaced by steel-bodied mineral wagons, and this was something that carried on, the pace of which was increased massively during World War II, and a lot of these sloped-sided 16-ton mineral wagons designed by Charles Roberts were built during World War II for the Ministry of Transport to facilitate better production of coal and transportation of coal, mostly for war materials. And this one is has latterly been repainted in unfitted British Railways grey. The railways on the nationalised railway, if they were grey, that means they didn't have vacuum brakes. If they were brown or what's technically called bauxite, it meant they had vacuum brakes, essentially. That's a very simplification, but pretty accurate. And here we see a bit of an evolution of that design. Gone are the slope sides. This one has been constructed using riveting, which was a bit of a dying art by this point. Welding had taken over. Although it also has a pressed steel end door. The end door was not fabricated, it was created, apart from these obvious bits here, it was created by one sheet of steel that was heat formed and pressed out. A bit of a strange process, and they weren't very popular in service because they were these type of doors because they were apparently quite difficult to repair. And now we're looking at the sort of not necessarily the ultimate 16-ton mineral, but by far the most common. This was diagram 1/108. Steel welded construction. It's got bottom doors, as we can tell by the marking there. It's got an end door there. Pretty nondescript, but this is essentially a wagon that was built in hundreds of thousands to replace all of those wooden bodied wagons we were looking at previously. And it wasn't just single door wagons. Companies started to build longer wheelbase wagons with double doors on each side, particularly for the conveyance of loco coal, meant for locomotive sheds. This one was built by the LNER. I was going to talk about a plate, but it's actually in British Railways livery, and is marked loco coal, something they did early on after nationalisation. It's got these interestingly designed cupboard doors there. It's very unusual, but for the most part, it was single door each side was the norm. But they did begin to build, as time went on, the British Railways more double door. Usually they were rated at 21-ton capacity mineral wagons. Although the GWR was quite fond of the double door 21-ton mineral wagon even before this point, but they were really the only one. And now we're looking at hoppers. Originally hoppers, externally they just look very similar to the normal wooden mineral wagon, but inside they have sloped insides, the whole at the bottom. Essentially it's just a chute on wheels, and then you move on to something like this. Interestingly, this was built by British Railways, but it is an LNER design. A bit archaic by the time it was built, but it's a wooden bodied, wooden framed hopper with sloping sides. You can just about make out the slope. Pretty nondescript, really, but if you had the facilities, far superior to a normal mineral wagon. And then eventually they ended up building things like this. It's much more recognisable as what we would consider a hopper, and what people in perhaps other countries outside of the UK might recognise as a hopper. All steel built. It's got some railings along the sides, a bit of a long wheelbase. A lot of those are built. Very useful bit of kit, really. Hoppers were also built for the conveyance of iron ore, as we can helpfully tell by the iron ore writing on the side. This was an LMS design, pictured in BR livery. All steel construction. These were also sometimes used for things like sand and that sort of thing as well. They were also built privately. This was a Charles Roberts design again. The ladder's seen better days. And you can tell it's a private owner one because it has the P prefix to the number there. And we're going to take a stop at this point for a brief commercial break, and then we will return and, as we can see, take a look at the weird and wonderful world of goods vans.
Chickens?
Nope. Pizza. Let's go eat.
Mary Jo, I'd like you to meet a friend of mine.
He called dances with chickens.
He's from England.
Figures.
What wonderful pizzas.
You won't find a lighter, crispier pizza in the whole of America. Secret's in the bases. I use the finest flour from Yukon to Georgia, and I take my time. So my dough, it just keeps on rising. You want to try some?
Delicious.
Good.
You boys want takeaway?
Yes, I want to take away the lot.
All of them?
For Tesco.
Don't worry. We find chickens.
How?
How?
No. How?
How?
No, how?
No.
How? Not no how. How? Oh.
Here are some scary words. E-commerce, online transaction, internet purchase. Here are some human words. Cheddar, loo roll, rubber gloves. When we buy things on the internet, what we buy won't change, just the way we buy. Now there's a credit card for you to use wherever you might shop. Now you can pay with marbles.
Tell me the first thing that comes into your head.
Chocolate.
Bacardi Breezer. There's Latin spirit in every one.
Call the live one-to-one girls now on 09066 400 999. That's 09066 400 999.
Hello and welcome back to Foundations of Truckanomics. Now, as you can see here and as you saw previously, I'm looking at goods wagons now, and this is a Midland Railway example in LMS, early LMS colours. Outside framing to the bodywork, wooden underframe, spoke wheels, very basic looking bit of kit, but pretty useful if you had something you didn't want getting wet. And then they started to be developed. This is an L&R version, more metal in the construction, metal underframe, metal frame. A lot of the framing is on the inside now though. Bigger, large capacity. You see the addition of ventilators on the ends to allow a bit of airflow. Things on the inside. other than that, not a massive advancement. This one also has vacuum brakes, but that likely would not have been there when they were built. This is the LMS version. More or less, you've got the sliding side door once again. You're starting to see corrugated steel ends there. This one also has HU vacuum braking. Vacuum brakes on vans tended to be more common than on open wagons, possibly because of the more delicate and perishable nature of things they carried. Incidentally, if anyone's wondering what the XP means, on the side of a lot of these British Railways painted ones, XP essentially means that they are suitable for running at express speed, which means they can run in vacuum braking at a higher speed, almost essentially at passenger speed rather than normal freight speed. And this is a British Railway standard version, not too dissimilar to the previous one we saw, but this one actually has plywood sides and plywood doors. This is something that became a lot more common during World War II because of wartime measures. We were cut off from a lot of supplies of wood, or certainly wood that was suitable for planks that will be used in this sort of construction because of the war. Wood we normally would have gotten from places like the Baltic states or Russia. And there were specialised types of vans, such as fruit vans. This is GWR fruit van. As well as having the ventilators on the end, this one has 2 on each end. They also have slats on the side to allow more airflow. Helps us keep the fruit cool and fresh. Something of note here is the unusual brake lever here on this open wagon. That's the whole subject in and of itself. The GWR like to do things their own way, and some of their earlier wagons had these bizarro braking systems. And just over here you can see a banana van. It's a bit out of the scope of what we're discussing, but of a specialised type. And this is a fish van, and this is actually Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway 1 in LMS livery. Outside frame, lots of slatting to help improve airflow, and there were actually ventilators on the top as well to help any air inside rise, but it's still got a wooden frame. This would have been able to run at fairly high speed with the vacuum brakes and screw couplings. It actually says return to Fleetwood on the side. That was the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway port, obviously a fishing port. And this is pretty much the evolution of designs like that. We have skipped forward a bit here, but this is a long wheelbase insulated fish van as opposed to a ventilated one we saw previously. This one is just ventilated. It's wooden bodied and it's got a lot of airflow. This one is, as I said, it's insulated. It's essentially it's almost like a freezer on wheels. It's got vacuum brakes, of course, long wheelbase to help it run better at high speeds, to work between Aberdeen and King's Cross. Aberdeen being the source of a lot of fish markets and whatnot from the various North Sea ports in Scotland. And we've also got gunpowder vans, a very specialised bit of kit. The insides were lined with wood to prevent any sparks. They were locked with padlocks for fairly obvious reasons. This was actually a design built by British Railways, but they were all fairly similar between the different companies. There was basically a standard design that had very little deviation from it because safety was very important with the nature of the cargo. And you've even got, this isn't a van per se, it's somewhere between a van and a hopper. It's a covered hopper designed for carrying grain, as you can tell. This is a British Railways built example. Very good vacuum braking, as you can see there. Quite a modern bit of kit for the time. This would have been built in the 50s. More of a specialised form of traffic. It has a chute underneath there, and it has inspection hatches on the top and an inspection hatch on the side. Quite specialised, as I said, but it would have made that form of traffic much more efficient and helped the railways compete with road traffic. This is a similar thing. This is literally called a cov hop, short for covered hopper. These carried absolutely all sorts of things like gypsum, sand, all manner of various powdered chemicals and whatnot. Interestingly, this one carrying sugar. You can see the British Sugar Corporation lorries there in the back. And yeah, hopefully they would have cleaned them out in between different duties, but quite a useful bit of kit. Really saves you having to bag things up. You can travel and carry it in bulk in between locations. And now we're moving on to cattle wagons. At one point, cattle was a very big earner for the railways, although by the time of the 50s it was somewhat in decline. This is an L&R version, wooden underframe and wooden bodywork, but notice, if you will, the HU vacuum braking again. That's the vacuum cylinder there. Vacuum braking allowing for infinitely better braking than would have been allowed on unbraked trains, which meant that you could carry this at high speed, and being able to carry cattle around quickly is quite efficient. It's very important because you don't want the cattle to lose condition as they're travelling, and you might think, well, how slow could they be? But back in the day it could take quite some time for wagons to reach their destination, so being able to run at higher speed was a great advantage. And then we're moving on to steel carrying types of wagons. This in and of itself is a huge category. It is one that, even though the wagons are nominally supposed to carry steel, in reality they carried all sorts of things besides that. These are single bolster wagons. Actually, two different wagons, very short for wheelbase. The idea being that you could sort of spread them apart or push them together depending on the length of the load. You could even have more than two together, but they tend to be used in pairs. Pretty much every company built something like this. These are GWR ones. A lot of earlier ones are built with wood bodywork. Now this is a double bolster wagon. This is actually a picture of a model because I couldn't find a particularly good picture of a real one. This is an LMS version. A later version, as you can tell by the steel bodywork and the steel underframe, and the helpful double markings to indicate double bolster. And if you're looking at a bolster, is these things here are essentially a bolster. This was a large amount of wood here, and the two iron or steel rods to keep the load in place. And this one also has drop sides, always quite useful for loading up. And this is a plate wagon. This one is another LMS one. If you're wondering why there's so many LMS wagons in this production, that's because it's the one company I know the most about, frankly, and I guess it's just a little bit of bias on my part. Like I said, the wooden bodywork, wooden underframe. This was designed for carrying sheet metal, essentially plates of steel plates and the like. They would have been loaded flat onto the wagon. It doesn't need to be very high because the load's very heavy. This is a bogie bolster. Bogies being these things here, and the bolsters, as we've already discussed, being these things here. And as carry extremely long load, in this case, steel girders, or possibly roll steel joists. And then we're moving on to somewhat more specialist wagons, or perhaps not. Perhaps in some ways more of a generalist type of wagon, depending on how you look at it. This is a pipe wagon. It's a wooden bodywork, but drop sides. The idea was that they carry steel pipes and the like, but in reality they were quite often used for carrying all sorts of loads and treated essentially as larger versions of the general merchandise wagons that we saw at the beginning of the video. In some ways they were almost like a natural evolution of those. They started to appear probably in the 30s and became something that the British Railways, the Nationalised Railways, started to build because they were a bit more useful, really. And this is a tube wagon. Apparently, tubes are longer than pipes. Wooden bodywork again, steel ends there, steel under frame. I mean, they pretty much all would have had steel under frame. It's just got one small door on the side. Likely that would have been just for cleaning out, because realistically they would have been loaded from above by crane. And I do believe this will be another good spot to take a slight break, a slight commercial break, courtesy of our sponsors, and then we will go on to part 3 of Foundations of Truckanomics.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, shh, come this way. Lend me your ears. Secrets of ancient rhetoric can now be yours for a trifling sum. The art of persuasive argument is all around us. In fact, we are surrounded by it. We live in a rhetorical age, but this is seldom taught and even more seldom explained. It is not for you to know, they said. The master of grammar knows how to write with clarity, precision, and correctness. The master of logic knows how to disarm his opponents with reason alone, and both can be powerful adversaries. But the master of rhetoric can outflank both, caring as he does little for their rules and even less for their defeated tears. The master of grammar asks, "Is this sentence correct? Is this sentence clear?" The master of rhetoric wonders, "Does my speech have the power to sway the passions? Can my words move the crowd?" Yes, it can. Yes, it can. The master of logic trains his mind to eliminate fallacies and formulate correct and well-defined arguments. The master of rhetoric knows that the reasoning mind can be flooded with emotions, that the flood can short-circuit logic and overwhelm his opponent, who will crumple. They will wonder why their well-written, well-reasoned arguments were so defenseless against the rhetor's apparent ability to bend reality to his will. Do the faces in the crowd not see through this dark magic? The master of rhetoric laughed at their wonder. He looked at the bemused, despairing face of the master of logic and spoke. "Harness that wonder, my friend. It was your own beloved Socrates who said, 'The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing.' And wonder is the beginning of wisdom." He turned to the master of grammar. "So lucid and correct your prose. But why does nobody listen to you? It was your own favourite, George Orwell, who wrote, 'Perhaps a lunatic was simply a majority of one.' Do not rail at the crowd for what is in their nature. Understand what they are, and they will listen to you." And with that, the master of rhetoric was gone. Find out what else he has to say by signing up to Foundations of Rhetoric. Fulfill your destiny and complete the trivium.
Hello everyone, and welcome to part 3 of Foundations of Truckanomics. This is the final part. We're looking at specialist wagon types. These ones were not as common, and they tend to vary in design, but still useful in their own way. This is a low Mac designed for carrying things like a bulldozer or a digger or various types of vehicles and whatnot. The low body here allows you an increased height in terms of what you could carry. Tunnels in the UK only being relatively small compared to other countries, being as low to the rail as possible is always very useful. And here we have a little bonus of a Northeastern Railway, a Northeastern Railway snowplow. This design of low might be built by the LNER, just incidentally. And here we have a well troll. It's a trolley wagon that has a well in the middle. And this one here is carrying a transformer. Not the robots in disguise, but a electrical transformer. And I believe this particular wagon was actually being used to electrify a main line at some point, potentially based on the writing on the side there. And then we're looking at the really obscure types here. This is actually 4 different wagons in one. Codenamed Poland by the Great Western. It's carrying what I presume is the main gun from a Dreadnought class battleship. Quite a few railways built wagons like this if they had armaments factories within their territory, because prior to World War I there was a massive armaments program underway to rebuild the Royal Navy, well, to increase the size of the Royal Navy from what it already was. And sometimes these wagons were used to carry in perhaps a Lancashire boiler, which is a big stationary boiler, or a large section of a girder bridge or something like that. And now we're looking at brake vans, a very complex subject in themselves. London North Western Railway one here in LMS livery. Only got what's called a ducket. Not a ducket, it's only got a veranda at one end and just windows at the other end. And this one has veranda at both ends. It's a Midland Railway example in LMS livery. Bit of an advancement over the previous one. Got to look at both ends. Definitely improvement. The GWR, it had, once again, it liked to do its own way. Like to go its own way, rather, and it had a type of brake van called the Toad. That was the classification. And it only had a veranda on one end, and that was just the way they did it and how they like to do it. This, incidentally, here is a shunter's truck. This is something that shunters, i.e. men who would help with the shunting, would ride on in large goods yards. This is a slightly later LMS goods van, very similar to the Midland Railway one in some ways, only longer, and it now has the lookout duckets, which were handy because the guard in his little compartment here where he's toasty warm, he can just stick his head in there and have a look out for the little windows there and see what was happening either way. And this is pretty much the last type of brake van that was built in any serious numbers. This is the standard British Railways brake van, similar to an LNER design, and it's got duckets there, it's got a veranda both ends, nice size compartment. What more do you need, really? And now we're moving on to wagons that were not there to earn money, essentially. Were engineers' wagons. These wagons were used for the maintenance of the railway or construction of new lines, perhaps. And this is just a simple ballast open. Great Western Railway example in British Railways livery. British Railways black. They painted, at least in the steam era, they painted their engineers' wagons black with white or yellow lettering. And then ultimately you end up with something like this. It's a longer version. It's got drop sides and drop ends. This is a Grampus. That was the code name given to this standard British Railways ballast wagon, ballast open. All of the engineers' wagons had various fishy code names, very strange. No one knows quite why. And then you also have ballast hoppers. This is a dogfish, and once again painted in black. The E signifies that it's an engineer's vehicle, and the W signifies that it's assigned to the western region of British Railways. And once again, the D on the number is a departmental. That stands for departmental, i.e. engineers, and B, that it was built by British Railways, not one of the precursor companies. These wheels here on the end, very useful. The engineer, workman, whatever, he can climb up onto the little platform. You turn that wheel, turn a wheel, and ballast comes out. And on this particular one, if you turn the right hand wheel, ballast comes out on the right hand chute. Turn the left hand one, comes out on the left hand. If you turn the middle, it comes out in the middle directly underneath. Quite handy. And some even bigger ones are built. These are big boys. These are absolute units. Bogey ballast hoppers. You can carry a lot of ballast in that. 40 tons, in fact. and this was assigned to the northeastern region. It was a codename Walrus. I believe the southern, actually I believe that London South Western Railway, which was a precursor to the Southern Railway, were the first company to build big hoppers like this, but pretty useful. These were still being used until recently in this country. And this is a specialised type of brake van. It's a ballast plough. As you can see by the plough here, what would happen is that the hoppers, once again this is a dogfish, but there were other types, they would drop ballast onto the rails and whatnot, and then you would pull at the end of the train, or perhaps push at the head of one coming behind this brake van, and the plough there would evenly distribute the ballast across the rails. Now previously you just had to get a bunch of big blokes of shovels to shovel all the ballast manually and distribute it all, but now you can just plough it with one of these, and a labour saving device. And this bloke here, he's on TimestealerTV, so he's famous. The engineers a lot of the wagons had many other types, but they were basically just their versions of a lot of the wagons shown already, so we're going to skip over those. And we're fairly close to the end now, but we're taking a look at some more privately owned wagons, and these are tank wagons. Not wagons for carrying tanks as in the vehicle, these are wagons that have a tank on them for carrying liquid. And this is an early type, a square, a rectangular tank wagon, privately owned, wooden frame. I believe that it's built by Charles Roberts. I believe that's the Charles Roberts builder's plate there. Quite an attractive livery. A lot of these were carried for the conveyance of tar from gas as a byproduct of gasworks and things. In the Victorian era, gasworks were becoming increasingly popular. People used to use gas to light their homes because electricity wasn't as common. And the railways sort of got in there on the ground floor when it came to conveying things like tar. But they also got in on the ground floor when it came to conveying things like oil, crude oil, and its refined products such as petroleum. We can see a slightly more familiar cylindrical type of tank here, owned by Shell BP. Now, in this country, it's a bit complicated, but Shell and BP, they were not the same company per se, but they sort of merged their marketing operations, which meant that a lot of the tank wagons they owned would have both companies' names on them. And if a tank wagon is black, at least in the steam era, if it was black, it was a Class B tank, which meant that the contents were not liable to explode if you got a naked flame near them, or not unless you tried very hard. Whereas a tank that was silver usually carried volatile mixtures, volatile loads such as refined petroleum and the like. This is a more advanced version. The previous version was wooden framed, and now we're looking at metal framed. I believe this was possibly another Charles Roberts one, but this one's owned by Esso. Once again, probably carrying unrefined crude, as a lot of the Class B tanks did. And this is sort of the ultimate evolution during the steam era of those. Vacuum brakes, much bigger tank, starting to become more recognisable here. And here's one for those of you who are fans of milk trucks. The sort of the thoughts, the ethos of the wagon world is the dairy tank, the milk tank. 6 wheels to aid running at high speed, and vacuum brakes. These things were often attached to the end of passenger trains to help them reach their destination as fast as possible, which is obviously pretty important when you're conveying milk. These are really something of a glamorous wagon, as much as a wagon can be glamorous. A bit of a favourite of modelers. And the very last wagon on our list, not particularly common, but I thought I'd throw it in here. This is a salt van. designed as you might imagine for the conveyance of salt. Something that you don't really think you would need wagons for, but salt was a pretty big deal. I suppose it still is. These days it's all carried by articulated lorries, but back then carrying it in a wagon made sense. Wooden body, wooden frames, as much as it's wood as possible really, because salt and metal not really the best of friends. Don't always get on that well. So quite often he's carried extremely colourful liveries. These were not nationalised or pooled in 1948, and so they belonged to the private companies even after nationalisation. And some of those colourful wagons on the line would be an interesting topic for a little segment on Timestealer TV down the line at some point. The various wacky and wonderful liveries of salt vans. But we're at the end of the presentation. I hope that's not been too dull. If any of you have fallen asleep, I do apologise. My throat is starting to get sore because I've recorded all of these back to back. So I am going to have a sip of my weak lemon drink, and I'm going to run the end credits. And let me know if you enjoyed the video. If you want more based and wagon pill content, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. And I will see you all again soon. Good night and good luck.